Hey everybody, it's Bob Ewalt from Entiva. I'm a solutions architect for Entiva, and today I'm going to show you how to set up an Azure VPN for Windows and Mac OS. Now this is a client VPN or a point-to-site VPN, not a site-to-site VPN. So it's going to be one user logging into Azure, and we're going to set it up hopefully a couple different ways using a certificate method, and we're going to use the Azure AD login method. So let's pull up our Azure environment and we'll get started. And I'm going to show you from start to finish the entire process from a clean Azure environment with nothing in it. So here we go. All right, first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a virtual network in our Azure environment. I have two subscriptions here, but I'm going to use our test subscription. And we're going to create a new resource group, and I'm just going to call it test RG for test resource group. And we're going to call this virtual network. We're going to just call it VNet1. East US is fine. We're going to set our address space here. So I'm going to say 172.16.0.0/16. Now this is the overall address space. You can separate this up into different subnets, which we will do here. I'm going to delete this old address space. And then we're going to add a subnet. This is the subnet we're going to put our VM in, our test VM. 16, let's say, .4.0/24. Oh, that's the subnet range. So we're going to put that down here. We're going to say our subnet name is going to be prod subnet. Let's just call it that. I'm going to say add. Security. We're going to disable Bastion host, all that stuff. We don't need to use any of that for this particular exercise. And then we're going to create our VNet. So it's going to go through the process of creating a virtual network, creating your subnet, and then once that's done, we will create our virtual network gateway and our test VM. Now the reason I'm going to create a test VM is just so we can test to make sure that we can actually access something over the point-to-site VPN once we have it all created. All right, so it says our virtual network is deployed. I'm just going to go over here to my other tab and refresh. So we do have our virtual network and we created a resource group. So the next thing I'm going to kick off here, I'm going to kick off a virtual machine. So I'm going to click on virtual machines here. I'm going to create an Azure virtual machine. It's going to pull up a wizard here for us to create. We're going to create it in our test resource group. I'm just going to call this VM1. East US is fine. We don't need any redundancy. Security type is standard. I'm going to use the Windows Server 2022 data center. We're going to use the standard D2S V3 is fine. And then we're going to give it a username and password as we start. And we're going to allow RDP in. I'm going to do just a test drive here, logging in from the outside using a public IP just so we can get the VM up and running. We're going to create a disk along with it. We don't need a premium disk for this one. Just standard HDD is going to be fine. As a test machine, networking. We're going to choose which virtual network we're going to put it in. So VNet1 is fine. We're going to put it in the prod subnet. We're going to give it a public IP, give it basic security group. We're going to allow RDP 3389, port 3389 to come in. And we're going to delete the public IP and the NIC when the VM is deleted. It'll just save us some work when we're doing our cleanup at the end. Here's some other things that you can enable if you want. We don't really need to do that. You don't need any monitoring necessarily. You're not going to run any scripts or anything when it runs when it first runs. That's fine. We're going to review and create, make sure that we didn't miss anything here. So it's going to cost us 19 cents per hour for this VM. All right, so it's 130 something bucks a month. So we're going to want to make sure we delete it when we're done. That's fine. We're going to go ahead and click create. And then it's going to go through the process of creating that virtual machine for us. Now, while it's doing that, we're going to go back over to this other tab, and we're going to create our virtual network gateway, because we need a virtual network gateway in order to create our point-to-site VPNs. We're going to click on virtual network gateway. Now you can also, if you don't have it up there at the top, you can actually also go do it from the search bar at the top for virtual network gateways, and just click here when it comes up. Then we're going to click on create when it pops up. We're going to make sure we're in the right subscription. We're going to give it a name here. We're going to call it VNet 1 Gateway East US. And then we're going to click on VPN, make it route based. Now the SKU does matter here. You can't use the basic VPN SKU if you're going to do certificate based VPN access for like Macs and stuff. It doesn't support IKV2. So we're going to do VPN GW1, generation 1, because that's the only generation there. We're going to put it in the right virtual network, so VNet 1. Now, it's gonna automatically assign a gateway subnet address here, which is fine. We created our prod network, which was 16.4.0/24. So that'll keep those separate. For us, we're going to create a new public IP. We're going to give our public IP a name. We're going to call that VNet 1 Gateway IP. We're going to disable active mode, so it won't give us two IPs. And we're not going to configure BGP. We're going to say review and create. Now the virtual network gateway takes maybe 15 minutes to set up. So once I click create here, I'm going to let it run, and then we'll come back once that has been deployed. We're going to go back here, check and see if our VM has been created. It looks like it's taken a little while too. Deployment is in process. So we're going to take a little break here, and we'll come back when everything has been created. All right, so our VM has been created now, so we can go to the resource and take a look at it. I'm just going to note down a couple of things here. Here's our private IP. So when we actually connect to our point-to-site VPN, we're going to try to RDP to this address here just to check and see if it works. So I'm going to note down that IP address. Right. Then what we're going to do is, all right, so we're going to refresh here. We're going to try see if we can connect to this via RDP. I'm going to download an RDP file. Yep, it can. We're going to keep it anyways. We're going to run it. This pops up here. I'm going to say don't ask for this again. Then we get our enter your credentials. So we're going to click on more choices. We're going to use a different account. And we're going to use our credentials that we created when we created the VM. And we're going to say OK. We get this other pop-up here that says, do you want to connect despite these certificate errors? Yes. And then it's going to connect us in. and our VM is working. I'm going to let it load up here. I'm going to set up its first run. We're going to get the standard Windows Server first time login. It's going to pull up the server manager for us. And that's really all we're going to do. We're just going to log into the machine, and then we're going to log out. I may not even let it finish loading, just for the sake of time here. I'm going to sign out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to disable RDP on our public side here. So I'm going to go into networking. I'm going to delete this rule that it created for us to allow RDP into our VM. So I'm going to delete it. If we need to troubleshoot in the future, we can go and always come back and add it back in if we need to get back in. So we're going to refresh the page, just make sure it got rid of that NSG rule, network security group rule. Good. Check on our, all right, so here's our network gateway. It's still being created. So while that's being created, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create we're going to create our self-signed certificates for our root certificate and our client certificate. So, because we're going to be first setting up certificate-based VPN for this particular exercise here. All right, so you can find these PowerShell commands here. You're going to open up an administrator PowerShell, and you're going to create your root certificate. So I just copied and pasted this from it's actually a Microsoft documentation here to create that. All right, so we created that, and then I'm going to keep the same window open, and I'm just going to copy and paste to create our child certificate. All right, so it gave us a thumbprint there. Now what I'm going to do, so it's installed those certificates on my local computer here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to export those certificates from my certificate manager on this computer so that we can use it on another computer as well. All right, so we're going to go into certificate manage user certificates here. And so we're going to, all right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to delete these and do it all over again. Because one of those pairs from earlier today when I was doing it. So I'm just going to run these again. And then we should be able to refresh. And here are the correct ones here. All right, so I'm going to first export my root certificate. Now, in this one, we don't want to export the private key. And we're going to do it as base 64 encoded X509. And we're going to tell it, hey, where do we want to put this? Created a folder here. And we're going to call this P2S root cert dot. And you don't have to put the CER in there. It'll put that in there for you. So we're going to save that. See how I put that .CER there at the end. And we're going to finish. And then we're going to do the same thing to the child cert. We're going to export it. Now in this one, we are going to export the private key. And then we're going to set a password on here. All right, and then we're going to say next. And again, we're going to put our file name here. Now this one's going to be a .pfx file. So it's P2S child cert. We're going to save it, say next and finish, and there we go. All right, so we have our two certificates, our root certificate and our client certificate, and we've saved them so we can transfer them over to another computer if we need to, or when we need to. All right, we already logged into our VM from using the public RDP. Make sure we actually have access to it. We turned off our RDP access in our network security group. We minimize this. Let's check on our virtual network gateway. So it's not quite done yet. So we're going to wait here until that's all completed, and I'll be back in just a minute. All right, that took a little while to get done, but now it's completed. The deployment's complete. We're going to go to the resource here. And this is our virtual network gateway. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to just check. That's fine. So this is where you would do your connections if you're doing a site-to-site connection, but we're going to set up point-to-site connections. So for your address pool for your site point-to-site connections, you cannot have an overlapping address pool. So I'm just going to put in just a standard 254 IP address here, subnet here. I'm going to select IKV2 and SSTP, and we're going to use the Azure certificate authentication type here. All right, so now for this one, we're actually going to enter in our, let's see here, root certificate data here. So I'm going to open up our root certificate. I'm just going to copy that. So you don't copy the first part or the last part. Everything in between is good. And we're going to say this is our test cert. And I'm just going to paste and enter. And I'm going to put in 172.16.0.0. I'm going to advertise our prod route. So I'm going to say save. That should finish here shortly, and then we're going to download the VPN client information. By the way, normally you wouldn't show this certificate data, but since I'm deleting all this at the end of the video anyways, I don't care that you see it or not. All right, so we're going to wait for that to complete, and I will be right back. All right, so that's saved. Now we're going to go ahead and click on Download VPN Client here. And that's going to take a little while to gather the info, and then it'll give us a zip file to download all of the information that we need for our VPN connection. There we go. We're going to say, yeah, we want to keep this, keep it anyways, and it's going to download our VPN information. So I'm going to unzip all of this stuff, and we're going to put it in a folder. All right. Now, what it gave us here is three different folders. Now, we're just going to work with this generic one. You have a couple of VPN clients set up, EXEs, which is if you're using the Azure VPN client, which you can download from the Microsoft Store or the Apple Store, something like that. But what I've found is you cannot run the Azure VPN client without having administrative access to your machine. So if you're working in a corporate environment where you have a compliance requirement that you cannot have local admin access, you don't want to use the Azure VPN client. There's ways around it, but it's really not a great way um, to create your VPN connections. Um, Something to note here. So when you're creating your certificates, you're going to create one. You can create one certificate for everyone, or you can create an individual certificate for each computer. Um, which and there are different programs out there that can help you do that at scale if you want, or if you just have a few, you can go through the process like I did just now in PowerShell to create those certificates and put one for each person that's going to be accessing the Azure environment. All right, so that's what I did here, and then you can have a list of them, and then you can revoke certificates if someone leaves, or if they get a new computer, or if, whenever you need to revoke a particular certificate, you can do that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go back here. Actually, let's save. We'll let that save a little bit. Now I'm going to go back to our generic thing here. So we're going to use this VPN settings XML file. And I'm going to open it up in Notepad. And we're just going to grab a piece of information when we create our VPN. So we're going to grab this VPN server name here when we create our VPN. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go into our network settings, VPN. We're going to create a new VPN connection using the built-in windows, and we're going to call this our test Azure VPN. And then we're going to paste, let me go back here, I'm going to paste that VPN server name. Our VPN type is going to be IKV2, and we're going to use our certificate here. Then I'm going to save it. Now, since we already installed our certificates on this computer, we don't have to do that again. We can just click on our test Azure VPN, and it's going to tell us, it's going to ask us which certificate do you want to use. Now, you only do this once, so we're going to choose our child cert, not a root cert, but our child cert. We're going to say OK. And it's going to say, want to continue connecting? Yes, we want to continue. It's saying that the certificate isn't signed by a CA authority. So we're just going to click through that, and it's going to complete the connection, and we're going to be connected. Now, we're connected to our VPN. Now we're going to test it by doing our RDP connection. Now, if you remember, our IP address was 172.116.4.4. We're going to click continue. Now our test admin, got to go over and get our credential or our password here for our test server, our test VM. We're going to click OK. It's going to give us the same warning here. We're going to say yes. Then it lets us into the VM. So we know that our VPN connection works. It's using the certificates, and those certificates will last as long as their certificates are valid. All right. So I'm going to go in here, sign out. Now, if you go into your VPN settings, we can disconnect. Now, the second time you connect, it's going to do it automatically. It doesn't ask you to select the certificate to use. It doesn't give you a warning or anything like that. It just connects you. And as you can see, if you use this method, you're not going to be required to use elevation when you use the machine. All right. So now that we have done that, let's go ahead. Just check my notes, make sure we're on track here. All right, so we're going to flip over to our Mac, and we're going to do the same thing here. And I'm going to pause while I switch over to the Mac. Right, so I transferred over some of the files that we'll be using for this particular example on our Mac here. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to install these certificates. So first our root certificate we're going to install, and it is going to ask for an administrative password when you first install the certificates. So we're going to go ahead and put that in. We're going to install our child certificate as well. Oh, and here you're going to have to enter your password for the certificate itself. Now, if you go into your keychain access here, you should be able to see our certificates. See them in the, let's see if we can just drag it over here. There we go. Just go ahead and refresh it a little bit here. All right, so we have our root certificate and our child certificate here. All right, so then we are going to open up our network settings here. We're going to go to network. We're going to create a new VPN interface, like V2. We're going to call this one Azure Test Environment VPN. We're going to create it. And then we need to get our server address. It's going to be in our VPN settings XML file. So here it looks a little different than it does on the Windows machine because we opened it up in Safari rather than in a text document, which is fine. Paste that into server address and also into your remote ID. And we're going to click on authentication settings, and we're going to use a certificate. It's going to ask us which certificate we want to use. We're going to use our child cert. Now, note down the name of the child cert, so P2S child cert, because that's, I think we're going to have to put in here as well, P2S child cert. All right, and we're going to apply, and we're going to connect. Now, notice that it shows that it wants the administrator name and password when it tries to connect. Now, this is the problem we have in Windows when we use the Azure VPN client program to log into Azure VPN. Now, there is a way to fix this, but I'm just going to go ahead and put it in for now, and I will show you how to fix that. But I just want to make sure that we can get connected. So it does say connected. We're going to test. Let's go ahead and test using remote desktop. Make sure we can connect into 172.16.4.4. We're going to connect, and we're going to use, let me just close this down. Go get our username and password from here. So test admin, and then we're going to copy that and paste it in there. Gives us the warning about it not being secured. We're going to say continue. Configuring remote PC, and then it lets us in. And we are in our server from a Mac machine. I'm going to go ahead and close the server manager. I'm going to log out of our machine. We're going to exit out of remote desktop, and then I'm going to show you how to fix the problem with it asking for the administrator password, an elevated privilege, when we're using our Mac to connect. So we're going to go into our system. Let's see if we can find it here. So it's one of these two here, one of these two private keys. I'm going to think it's probably this one. We're going to test this one first. We're going to get info, and we're going to go to access control. We're going to enter in our administrator password, and we're going to say allow all applications to access this item. And we're going to save that change, and then we're going to test it on our VPN here. We're going to disconnect, and then we're going to connect. And look at that. It didn't ask us for an administrator password. So you got to change that, that one setting on your keychain access private key so that it allows the application to access it all the time, whether or not you have your administrator password. So I did all of this on the macOS using a non-admin user, with the exception of when those things popped up and I had to enter in the admin password. So I'm a non-admin user right now, and I can use that VPN to gain access to my Azure VNet. All right, let's hop back over to our PC here. All right. Now that we have demonstrated on a Windows machine, on a Mac OS machine, now we're going to tear down our Azure environment and we're going to return it, so we're not going to be paying any more for it. All right, so you can go into each resource. I like to kind of delete the bigger ones first. So we're going to stop the virtual machine. So it's deallocating. And once it's stopped, it'll say stopped deallocated right here. There we go. Then we're going to delete it. And it's going to delete everything, the OS disk, the network interface, the public IP addresses, all along with it. So we're going to delete it. Okay. So that's in the process of deleting. Now we're going to go over to our virtual network gateway, and we're going to delete this guy too. I saw the notification that, yep, so it successfully deleted the virtual machine, VM1. So now that the virtual machine is deleted, now we can delete the VNet. All right, so it says the gateway subnet is still in use. So we got to wait for the virtual network gateway to be deleted. And that one's still in process here. But if we refresh, we should see that our VM is gone, which it is. If you go into your test subscription, we can look at all the resources that are still here. So the network security group is still there. We're going to have to delete that. That was actually part of the VM1 that it didn't delete when it deleted the VM. So we'll go ahead and delete that. So we're still waiting on the virtual network gateway to be deleted. And then we can delete our VNet. I'm going to see if I can delete the gateway IP address. Type yes to confirm. We're going to do that. And then we're just going to wait for everything to get deleted here. So once all of your resources are deleted, you can delete your resource group as well, your VNet. Once those are deleted, then you're done and you know how to implement an Azure VPN with certificates with IKV2 authentication on both Windows and Mac, and not using the Azure VPN client. Um, I hope you've I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial video. I hope it kept your attention and it taught you something new. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comments below, or you can contact me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is at Bob Ewalt. It was so good spending some time with you tonight. I hope you learned something, and I hope you are always pursuing knowledge and always learning. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye bye.